Welcome everyone to this edition of Stories for Healing. As you know, if you've been following us, we're storytellers who are telling stories because these are very difficult times for our communities, for our countries, for the world. There are times when we've been divided, and we're divided still. And we have to learn how to actually not just live next to each other, but start to communicate with each other and start to really build bridges between us, not anything else. We do that by telling, as storytellers, we encourage that by telling stories of transformation, of healing, of reconciliation. Not because I've got the right answer and you've got the wrong one, or I'm the good person and you're the bad. These are stories about people who manage to be transformed by something in their environment or by something inside. And so we've invited storytellers to come and be with us on that journey. They're coming from around the world. So today we're very fortunate to have a storyteller, Ernie Boxall, from us. And Ernie has a story. So Ernie, please tell us a story.
Thank you, Jim. Everyone, let me ask you, do you know how your mother and father met? You see, I do. My father, in the Second World War, was with the Royal Warwickshire Regiment in England. But he was the regiment's sporting mascot. He played football for the regiment. He played rugby for the regiment. He ran for the regiment, but most importantly, he boxed for the regiment. He always gave 100%, and he never ever drank alcohol. He ate with the officers so he could keep his strength up, and yes, he was taken off heavy duties to keep his strength up. He didn't drink, as I was saying, until 2 years after the war, when he met some friends in Attleborough, Nuneaton, and they went to the Granby Arms, and he had 3 pints. Feeling rather heady, he thought he'd get some fresh air, and on his way out of the pub, he tripped and he knocked a woman over. Now, he knew her, but not well enough to knock her over, maybe, but she picked him up and she walked him around the corner to where she lived. And that's how I was born. Not that night. 2 years later, after they were married. So I know how my story started before I was born. When I was 8 years old, I came home from school and my father had been made redundant. He'd sold our beds to make some money, and for 6 months I lay on pallets filled with straw. And that passed. He got his job back. We got our beds back. When I was 15, I managed to get a position in an engineering firm. But after a year, I realised that at 6:45 in the morning, stepping over a wooden step and into a wooden engineering shed with the windows blacked out against the sun, and as I looked over my shoulder, the sun was rising over the rooftops. And when I walked out of that shed at 4:45, with the sun disappearing out under the rooftops, I realised that this probably wasn't for me. So I went home and I said to my parents that I wanted to leave the engineering firm and go back to college. They said, "What do you want to do that for? You'll never make a go of that." Now, you know, I realise now that they were doing that out of a position of love, because in those days, a job in the factory was a job for life. But every time over the next 3 years, I went back to them and said, I want to go to college, it was the same answer. And even now, when I try something new on this shoulder, there is a little voice saying, are you sure you're going to be able to do that? So be careful what you say to your kids, even if you're trying to look after them. Now, when I got to 22, I'd been speaking for a while, and I thought I'd try my hand in the theatre. So I went down to a drama school in London, and I did quite well. And in fact, I got to within 4 or 5 places of lead roles on a few occasions, but never quite got there. And it started to take a toll on my self-esteem. And so at 26, 27, I decided to leave the theatre and try for something else. Now, when in my 30s, I decided that adventure would be part of my life. I'd been meeting and walking out with a girl for 6 months, and we've been getting on quite well. And we went out one evening to a concert in a stately home with an island surrounded by water. Banks rose up to the side as thousands of people picnicked on a beautiful English dusk. And then, as the stars shone, the 1812 overture played. Cannons went off, rockets soared into the sky. And she turned to me and said, I brought you down here to say thank you for the last 6 months. I'm going to Israel on Monday. I didn't even know she was Jewish. But over the night, I thought that sounds quite interesting. I didn't like this other job I had. I didn't like where I lived, so I said, I'll come with you. She went out that Monday. I was due to go out the following Monday, so at the weekend, I went out with my mates and we were celebrating. The barman said, what's the celebration? And I said, I'm going to Israel on Monday. His face dropped. He said, what about the Yom Kippur War? It had started that day. The kibbutz office rang me up and they said, do you still want to come? Well, I got no home, no job. So I did actually go out to Israel on a kibbutz in the Yom Kippur War. And you're saying, what a hero. Actually, my girlfriend was sent to a kibbutz in the north on the Lebanese border and was bombed most of the days. I was sent to a kibbutz just north of Eilat in the Negev desert and had the time of my life. We were ordered to go to the air raid shelters on one morning in 6 months. And after that morning, when I'd been told that I'd still got to work with the chickens, even though the air raid or the warning signs hadn't gone off, I decided that if they came round the following morning and asked me to get up, I'd stay in bed. But as it was, they didn't. And that was the only time I was at war in the Yom Kippur War. Now let's go on a little bit. I took a job, having worked with a lot of young people, in a young offenders prison. And I did 3 months training. And I was told that after the training that I would not be left on my own with offenders for at least another 3 months. On my first day, I went in and we entered a room with 4 young offenders who were in there for violent behaviour. But that's okay. I'd got 2 guards with me until a ruckus started somewhere else and they disappeared out of the door, leaving me on my own. Now, the offenders knew that they couldn't hit me because the cameras were on, but they certainly intimidated me. And I went home that day and said, this is probably not for me. So I packed that job in. Let's move on another few years when I was working self-employed. doing the 15, 16, 17 hours days, 6 days a week. And one day I was walking through town when a pain hit my left side. And I collapsed into the street just as a double-decker bus was backing up towards me. Someone ran over the road and banged on the driver's window to make him stop, and he did, and I was taken to hospital. I'd had a stroke through working too many hours in a stressful job. Having come out of the hospital and gone on a few years, I decided that I wanted to stay with young people. So I became a supply teacher. And that meant that I started at what we call middle schools, 8 to 11. And I really enjoyed it until one day I was on playground duty. And I saw in the far corner one boy take another boy by the shoulders and throw him to the ground while his mate ran up and kicked him in the back. Now he was going back again to do the same thing. So I ran over and I pulled the boy lying on top off and took the victim away. An hour later, I was called into the headmistress' office and I was reprimanded for putting my hands on the pupil on the floor. I should have talked to him, she said. And that was my last day as a supply teacher. Now, to finish these stories, I go further forward to the year 2000, when I am living with a wonderful woman and 2 daughters, only I was involved in sport. And I spent so much time being involved in sport that the lady left me. And I agree now, I know why she did it, but it hurt. And losing the daughters then really, really hit the soul. I was working at a hospital in Coventry. And I'd moved into the area. And on the first weekend, I went shopping at one of the local malls, as you would call them, shopping centres. And when I came out, I came to an island and I couldn't remember whether to turn right or left to get back home. I turned left. I should have turned right. And that left turn took me past a university where they're advertising Tai Chi. I thought I'll have a go at that. And I did for 2 years. And we were doing an exhibition at that same university for health and ecology. And we finished our demonstration. I looked over a banister and people were sitting in chairs with other people with their hands on their shoulders doing nothing. So I sat in a chair and a man put his hands on my shoulders. And 20 minutes later, I woke up in an exhibition with thousands walking round. My shoulders were down here, not up there. And as I got off the chair, I was walking on air. That was shiatsu. And so in 2002, I qualified as a shiatsu practitioner and also taught Tai Chi. And for the last 18 to 20 years, that is pretty much what I've been doing with all the ups and downs of the economy. It's been a rough ride. And last year, I came close to losing my house. And so I gave up work. I retired and I took my pension. Just as I'd given up work, work started to come in. And so I decided to semi-retire. And the work that I did was to run storytelling groups in Leamington Spa, where I live, one evening a month, where I invited storytellers, authors, poets, musicians to entertain a live audience. And all the proceeds from that evening went to a different charity. so that every event had someone come along from the charity, tell us all about the charity, tell us all about the obstacles that they or the people they worked with had faced or were facing. And they went away with the donation from the evening. And that's why I'm doing this now, because I've heard the stories of the people who were involved with those charities and being helped by those charities. But the real strength, you see, is that not all of those stories were mine. The story at 8 of me lying on a pallet of straw happened to a lady called Helena Wyman Lester. And she lives in Rugby and she works for a health and safety company. The story of my theatre events happened to Joe Howarth, who lived in Liverpool and is now running very successful membership programs for being happy. The story of me working in the prison happened to Roger Griesby, who runs a recording studio in Anstey in Coventry. And the story of me having a stroke happened to Martin Warrilow in Tamworth. You see, those stories were so powerful that even after 8 to 10 years, I remember not only the story, but who told it and where they lived and what work they were doing. The other stories are mine. Asking my mother, finding out how my mother and father met, asking my mother if I could go to college. The supply teacher story and the teacher and the stories of the Tai Chi and the Shiatsu are mine. And hopefully by me telling them, you will not only remember those stories, you may remember the people they happen to, and you may remember me. If you do, I encourage you now to tell your story, because nobody will tell it better and nobody knows your story like you do. That is my final parting word. Tell your story before others tell it for you. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, Ernie. Wonderful. Thank you. You're right. When we can tell somebody else's story,
Yeah.
so many good things happen.
Yeah.
We get to know them, and in an odd way,
Absolutely, Jim.
I think we get to know ourselves better.
Yeah.
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 And I think that's the challenge for all of us, is to see the world through others' eyes and to see how people see us.
Yeah. That's
Wonderful.
brilliant. Thank you. I loved it.
So, folks, thanks again for stopping by. There'll be another edition coming right on the heels of this one. Please, if you can't watch them live, find them back on Facebook, or even more easily, find them on YouTube, where we are just trying to meet the needs of this very fractured world that we live in. Thanks a lot.